So John chapter 11, let's read a good chunk of it. Now a man named Lazarus was ill. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay ill, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is ill." When he heard this, Jesus said, "This illness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you are going back." Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light." After he had said this, he went on to tell them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up." His disciples replied, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better." Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she replied. "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is come into the world." After she said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and is asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more, deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and cloth round his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." Let's pray. Father, we ask that you will help us as we look at this passage, open our eyes. May we see some wonderful things about Jesus that transform our lives. In his name, amen. Well, one year when I was in university, I came home and sat around the dinner table. My brother, almost jokingly and just in general conversation, just said, "William Bent is dead." It was quite a shock, and thank you, Dave, my brother, for breaking the news to me so gently. We weren't close friends, me and William Bent, but we had been in the same class in primary school for throughout the time in primary school. I'd been around his house, I'd seen his pet African snails, giant ones. So although we weren't close, we weren't really close. We knew each other a little bit. And he had been out in the town, and he had died with ecstasy in his body, an excess of ecstasy. He may have taken an overdose, or his drink may have been spiked. We just don't know. But there he was dead, and roughly 20 years of age. You see, we tend to think of death as something that happens to us years down the line, something that happens when we're like 80, really old, you know, when we've had all of our fun in life and there's no fun left to have, we're decrepit, we can barely wash ourselves, feed ourselves, and there's so many aches and pains that actually death would be a welcome relief. That's often what we think of when it comes to death. But William was 20 when he died, roughly. And he's not the only friend of mine who has died at an age younger than I am right now. I'm 33, in case you're wondering, and I've had two friends that have died at a younger age than I am now. One died of cystic fibrosis, a condition of the lungs, and the other died of an unexpected brain hemorrhage very suddenly. And that's not to mention the close brushes that I've had with death as well. As a baby, I was taken into hospital, blue, floppy, not breathing, a near experience of cot death. But obviously they brought me back from the brink. When I was 16, I was hit by a car off my bike, taken to hospital in an ambulance, unconscious. But of course I survived that one as well. And there's been a few other occasions where I've had close encounters with what could have been my death. During our younger years, we think we're invincible, don't we? We think we could survive anything. We think death is not going to touch us. But death is as much a possibility for us when we're younger as when we're older. Yes, chances are you will live older, but it can happen when we are younger to us. And if death does come our way, how do we deal with it? Perhaps we know someone who is dying, perhaps someone close to us, perhaps a friend in university even. Or perhaps when we think about our own death, whenever it may come, how do we face the fact that one day we are going to die? Well, we can take the One Direction approach, can't we? Live while we're young. I'm sure you're all fans of One Direction. No. But as the years pass, if you take that approach of live while you're young, you actually realise you can't fit it all in anyway, and perhaps the choices you've made when you are young, well, you would have done things differently anyway, and no one likes to admit they're old anyway. I know some 80, 90-year-olds in our church who refuse to believe that they are old and should go to the senior citizens group that meets in our church. Well, this is a really cheery start, isn't it? But when you give me a title, as you have done, Hope is Dead, what do you expect, you know? I've been given this chapter, John 11. It is a fantastic title, Hope is Dead, so utterly bleak and hopeless. But actually in that title there is hope, as we shall come to see. You see, as we see the darkness of death, and it is dark death, that's why people wear black to funerals. As we see the darkness of death, it is then that we see that there is hope in Jesus, even more so. So here in this story, you've got this guy, Lazarus, who is sick, but Jesus, the great healer, he's been sent for, though he stays 2 more days in the place where he is, in a separate place from where Lazarus is. And by the time he goes there, Lazarus has already been dead for 4 days. It took a while for communication to happen, of course, but he goes and consoles the dead man's 2 sisters, but the funeral has already happened. He's already been in the tomb for 4 days. But it doesn't stay that way, does it? Jesus calls for Lazarus to come out of the tomb, and he comes out all wrapped up in his grave clothes. Remarkably, he is brought back to life again. That's essentially the story, isn't it? And from this true story that happened 2,000 years ago, I simply want to tell you 4 amazing things about Jesus. So the first of those things is to see Jesus' control. Jesus' control here. I used to work in a coffee shop in Cardiff, not for very long, just a few months, and normally it was okay, but then suddenly we had a rush of customers queuing to the door, which was very unusual since we were lucky if we had 20 customers in one day, but there were about 20 customers in one go, all queuing to the door. Just steamed the milk, a full jug of hot milk ready to pour for all of the coffees that were about to come, only in the panic and the chaos of all of these customers coming at once, knocked over the jug of milk, went all over the floor, about 10 drink orders lined up, ready to go, all ruined, all because I was not in control in that chaotic situation. But unlike me, Jesus was fully in control of everything that was going on. He's instructing his disciples. He's saying, this is exactly how it's going to happen. We're going to stay here for 2 more days, and then we'll go. And even when his disciples are in a bit of a flap, because they're worried that this is going to result in Jesus' death and their death as well, Jesus remains calm and in control of everything. Even when the dead man's sisters are panicking because Jesus wasn't there in the right time, Jesus remains in control. He's saying all that is going to happen in this story. As you read it, if you read it through again, then you'll see those different times when Jesus is showing that he is in control of what is going on. But he's not just showing here that he's in control of the situation. He's showing even more so that he's in control over life and death itself. The other day I was channel hopping, as you do when you get a spare moment, came across something like the 50 most awful talent show disasters or something like that. One of these ridiculous shows. I didn't stay on it very long. But I stayed on it long enough to see this geeky man with no stage presence whatsoever on this talent show, and he was an escapologist. You know what those are, do you? Try and get out of difficult situations, like, I don't know, wrapped in a straitjacket or handcuffed or something like that. He had something very simple. He was just in a bag that was tied up, and he had to escape from that. So very simple. He had 2 volunteers come on, tie him up into this bag, and then for 30 seconds or so, he couldn't escape. Just tied up, wriggling around in this bag. And Bobby Davro, do you know who he is? Old presenter guy, he was just laughing away. He's supposed to be a comedian, I don't think he's very funny, but he was just laughing away, watching this escapologist wriggle around on the floor in this bag, doing nothing, until on he came with a pair of scissors and cut the man out of the bag. The escapologist's excuse? Well, the volunteers tied the bag too hard. That's what he said. That's the point, though, isn't it? They're supposed to make it impossible for him to escape. But obviously it was too hard for the escapologist to escape. It's kind of what Jesus does here. He makes it an impossible situation for him to resolve. Because he could have healed Lazarus while he was still alive, couldn't he? He could have stayed where he was and healed Lazarus remotely. But no, he stays there 2 more days, separate from Lazarus, and lets Lazarus die, so that he's been dead 4 days by the time Jesus gets to him. And he does that just to show that he's in control, not only over sickness, as he shows throughout the gospel accounts, but he is even in control over life and death itself. Because someone who has been dead for 4 days, Jesus is able to bring him back from being dead. Now, we might think little of that. If we're familiar with the story, which I'm sure some of us are, if we've read it before, then we're probably not that amazed by this. But to the mindset of the people of the time, this would have been absolutely remarkable. Because only God himself has power over life and death. Only God can bring life, and only God brings death as well. Which surely shows that this is not just an ordinary man. Yes, he was a man, he had full human nature, but this was God incarnate, God in full human nature. Standing here in front of them was the God who is in control of life and death itself. Here he was with them. Well, that's Jesus' control. Next we see Jesus' compassion. Jesus had this deep love for this family. He loved the man, and he loved his 2 sisters as well. And he shows this by going to be with them in their time of loss. He goes to comfort them, to show his compassion to them. And that's even though this was at risk to his own life, as the disciples pick up on. But his compassion reaches a whole different level. When he finally comes to the tomb, we see him weeping in the face of death. In that verse, which is alleged to be the shortest in the Bible. Actually, I think there's a shorter verse in the NIV translation. If you want to know what that is, you can speak to me afterwards. But he wept there, doesn't he? He weeps, knowing that his close friend has died. And then have a look at verse 33, if you've still got your Bibles open. It says, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. That is how great his compassion is, that he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. And actually the force of that isn't quite captured by that phrase. It's actually a lot stronger. One translation puts it, a deep anger welled up within him, a deep anger. He is angry in this moment. But what is creating that anger? Who is he angry at? I mean, surely he's not angry at the two sisters, Mary and Martha. He wouldn't be angry with them, would he, at this point? He's there to comfort them. And he's not going to be angry at Lazarus for dying. Surely not. And he's not going to be angry at the crowds either. Surely here, he's not angry at a person, but he is angry at death itself. Now, I meet grieving people all the time in my job. I'm the minister of a church, and in the last 4 years of being the minister of the church there, I've done 54 funerals, which means I've probably ridden in a car with a dead person 54 times. That's a claim not many people can make. But being with the families of those who've lost loved ones, people react in all kinds of different ways. It is not unusual for the family of someone who've lost someone to get angry, to get cross and outraged. And the reason we might get angry at death is because it is never meant to happen. It never feels natural when someone dies. You see, we weren't designed merely to live for 80 years and then to pack our bags and say that's it. The first man and the first woman in the garden, that ideal situation where they lived with God, they were enabled to eat from the tree of life, which meant they could live in an ongoing and unlimited way. That is how we were designed to live forever in union with God, in loving relationship with God. That life was lived in that sense of close connection with God, so that they knew God in this intimate way. They loved him and he loved them. And that's what we're designed for. But just as they cut themselves off from the tree of life by cutting themselves off from God, so we have all done the same. We cannot have that unlimited, ongoing life of ourselves. Death is a reality for each one of us, and it should at times make us angry. But out of compassion and out of his sense of the worth of human life, Jesus gets angry because his friend Lazarus has died. Jesus gets angry. We're the ones to blame for death coming into the world, but Jesus gets angry without being the one to blame. And so he has this righteous anger against death. Jesus is not part of the fault. But Jesus here, he identifies with us. He feels the pain that death brings to us. He feels the anger that we feel in the face of death. Jesus is loving and compassionate, feeling what we feel in the face of death. The third thing is Jesus is calling. You know the occasions when you're excited about a film that is going to come out, it's been advertised for months on end and you can't wait to go to the cinema and see it, or if you're even more patient, wait for it to come out on DVD, or if you're even more patient, wait for it to come out on Netflix, if it ever does. Well, if you can't wait and you want a little taster of what it's going to be like, you go and watch the trailer, don't you? Go on YouTube, whatever it might be, and watch the trailer. And the trailer is supposed to say, this is what the film is going to be like. It's supposed to be a little taster of what is to come. Unfortunately, in trailers, they normally put the best bits, which means it is not a case of this is what the film is like, but only better. Instead, these are the best bits of the film and the rest is all padding. That's normally what trailers are, aren't they? Well, this episode with Lazarus, this is a bit of a trailer, really. This is a teaser of what is about to come. You see, just around the corner, Jesus was about to face his own death. Throughout John's gospel account, Jesus speaks throughout it of his hour of glory that is to come. It comes up time and time again. Now, when we think of glory, we think of perhaps the Olympic athletes and how they accomplish something amazing and stand up and are cheered and celebrated and come home for their celebrations as well. But for Jesus, it meant not being lifted up and praised, but being lifted up on a cross to die. That was his hour of glory. It wasn't him doing something amazing in that sense, but it was having something done to him that was excruciating, even as his Father was punishing him for the sin that we had done. That was what his experience was. That was his hour of glory. But just as Lazarus' episode didn't end in Lazarus' death, so for Jesus it did not end in his death. That is how this episode is a bit like a trailer for what was to come. I don't know how many of you are still playing Pokemon Go. Anyone? Or did you even bother starting? Maybe you never bothered in the first place. If you know anything about Pokemon Go, when you go to a gym and have a battle, you've got to know if your Pokemon are strong enough to battle the Pokemon in the gym, strong enough to defeat them and take over the gym. Well, Jesus, he was strong enough to take over not a gym, but to defeat death. He conquered death. He defeated death by dying and rising again. He was strong enough to beat it. And that's one thing none of us could ever do. None of us is ever strong enough to beat death. Every one of us will be caught by it eventually, as much as we try and evade it while we can. But Jesus is giving this little taster in this episode with Lazarus, showing that he is stronger than death, showing that one day after he had died, he would be strong enough to break through death and come back to life again, all because he was God himself. So Lazarus died, Jesus brought him back to life, but then one day Lazarus died again. Of course he did. He's not around on this planet today, so of course he died. Jesus, when he died, he didn't merely go to death and come back out of it again, like Lazarus did. Rather, he went into death and went through it and out the other side, rising up again. That is the difference between Jesus' death and Lazarus' death. Lazarus went to death and came back out again. Jesus went to death and went right through it, breaking through to the other side, which means he has conquered death. It means he has control over death. Coming back to the Pokemon, when you take over the gym in Pokemon, you're able to own that gym. It is yours for the taking. And so because Jesus has conquered death, he owns death. He has the say over death. That was his calling, to go to death and to break through it, to smash it and conquer death itself. And finally, we see Jesus' challenge. You see, why is that episode here? Why are we here tonight looking at John chapter 11? Why when John was writing his gospel account, did he think, I'll put chapter 11 here, this account of Lazarus dying and coming back to life again? Why is it here? Why are we looking at it? Why was it written in the first place? Why was the whole book of John written? Well, it's all because of Jesus' challenge to them then and to us now. The challenge to believe in him. In verses 14 to 15, he tells his disciples that the reason he delayed going to be with Lazarus was so that they would believe. When he's talking to Martha in verses 25 to 26, he's challenging her about what she believes. And when she suggests that there might be a bit of a smell if they open up the grave, Jesus challenges her again to believe in verse 40. And in verse 41 to 42, Jesus prays out loud, not for his own benefit, but so that the people around him might believe. And in fact, verse 45, the verse that we didn't read, the final result is that some of them do believe in him. Now, for the last 4 years, I've not had a TV license, which has meant that I've been able to escape the inevitable pull of the vacuous vortex that is the X Factor. Pointless TV program, isn't it? But now that we have a TV license, it means that inevitably we've shamefully started watching it again, just a little bit anyway. But how many times when you're watching that show or other shows like it, do you hear people talking about believing in themselves? You've seen that, haven't you? Usually they're deluded and can't sing at all, or can't do whatever it is they're supposed to be doing. Or sometimes the judges tell them, you've got to believe in yourself, and then you'll be able to sing such that the world will want to hear you, or something like that. Pathetic, isn't it, on X Factor? But when you're talking about death, when you're talking about something as serious as that, you can't simply say to yourself, well, I'll believe in myself, and then death won't touch me. Or say to someone who's dying of cancer, try this. Well, don't try this. But if you say to someone who's dying of cancer, just believe in yourself, how ridiculous, how mocking would that be to say to someone? What good is that going to do, saying believe in yourself in the face of death? Believing in yourself in the face of death is like expecting that if Honey G wins X Factor, she's going to have a lifelong music career. If you know who Honey G is. Maybe not. It's just not going to happen, is it? And likewise, believing in yourself in the face of death. What good is that going to do? Death is the ultimate leveler. Puts everyone on the same level. You know, in this world we fight for power, we fight for position, for popularity. All these different things we try and outdo each other on. And death comes in and just flattens all of that. There's a complete indiscriminate nature to death because everyone dies. No one escapes. So we can't believe in ourselves any more than we can believe in any other person. I can't believe in you, you can't believe in me in order to get out of death. Except there is one person who has gone to death and come out the other side. There is one person who has shown that he has the power over death, power to bring life through death. It's believing in him that we escape through death ourselves. Let's put these verses on the screen for us. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? So this is saying that whoever believes in Jesus in this lifetime, even though they're going to die, they'll have life. They will escape the clutches of death and live on. And whoever has that life after this one, by believing in Jesus, well, they will live on forever. They will never die. All because Jesus is the resurrection and the life. He's not merely saying, I bring resurrection and life. He's saying, I am the resurrection and the life. But that challenge at the end has got to ring in our ears. Do you believe this? Do you believe this? You may not be a follower of Jesus this evening. I don't know who most of you are. You may not know Jesus. You may not have given yourself to him. You may not believe in him. Well, his call is for you to believe in him. Or you may be one of his followers. But perhaps to follow Jesus is just a tag on to your life. Just something else you do amongst the many other things that you do. But if you really believe in Jesus, then the whole of your life is going to be staked upon that belief. The whole of your life is going to center around believing in Jesus. The whole of your life is going to be given over to him. So that even if it costs you every single thing that you have, even if it costs you your life itself, you'll willingly give that over to Jesus because you believe in him. Jesus' words one last time. Do you believe this? Let me pray. Father, thank you for your son Jesus. Thank you for how amazing he was and is. Thank you for how he demonstrated such love and compassion whilst here on this earth, love and compassion that still flows to all of humanity today. And we thank you that he showed that he is the one who has the power over life and death. Thank you that he demonstrated this not only by raising Lazarus from the dead, but that he also, when he went to his own death, came back on the third day. He went break through death, smashing it to pieces so that he owns life and death itself. And thank you that by believing in him, we have life in his name. Life that is not just for the here and now, as wonderful as that is, but life that goes on even through death itself. Lord, may each one of us come to a point where we believe in him, and not just as a peripheral part of our life, but that Jesus and belief in him is central to all and everything that we are and do. Pray for these guys here as witnesses of Jesus on this campus here, for those who are his followers. Lord, help them to hold out this belief in Jesus as something that is worth having. In his name we pray. Amen.